She had been lying in that cold, silent hospital room for hours. A woman whose wealth once commanded entire corporations, surrounded by blinking machines that could no longer promise her another sunrise. Nurses whispered in corridors. Specialists walked out with the same defeated expression. One after another, 15 doctors, each more renowned than the last, admitted the same truth: there was nothing left to do outside that room. The air carried a tension so heavy that even the marble floors felt quieter. The billionaire's influence, money, connections suddenly seemed meaningless against the slow collapse of the person he loved most. He had brought in experts from 3 countries, flown in cutting-edge equipment, and even secured emergency authorization for experimental care. Nothing worked. Hope itself felt like it was fading then, in the middle of that despair. Destiny arrived in the most unexpected form. A young delivery boy, dusty shoes, oversized jacket, and exhaustion etched across his face, stood quietly near the hospital entrance. He had come for something simple, something routine, unaware that life was about to twist his path into a place far beyond anything he had imagined. No one noticed him. No one cared. In this building, people like him rarely mattered. He was just another invisible worker, moving through a world that never paused to acknowledge him. Yet within the next few hours, this invisible boy would do what an entire team of celebrated specialists could not. But for now, simply stood near the sliding glass doors, holding a small, worn-out delivery bag against his chest. His name was Arav, a young man who spent his days weaving through traffic, delivering parcels to people who rarely glanced at his face. His world was built on speed, silence, and survival. He worked double shifts, slept little, and sent whatever he could back home to support a grandmother whose health was slipping quietly into frailty. Life had never been soft on him, but it had taught him something far more valuable: the ability to notice the things others overlooked inside the towering hospital. Every corner seemed polished with wealth. Bright white lights reflected off chrome elevators. Security personnel stood with folded arms near the VIP wing. Every room in that section carried whispers of power: CEOs, foreign guests, and now a billionaire fighting time itself. Arav had delivered packages here many times before, yet each visit reminded him of the divide carved by society, a world of privilege soaring in comfort, while people like him walked below it, unseen. As Arav reached the reception counter to sign off his delivery, a faint commotion behind the glass partitions caught his attention. A group of doctors moved hurriedly toward a conference room. Their faces looked drained, tense, burdened with the weight of failure. Behind them, the billionaire himself walked stiffly, every step trembling not from weakness, but from fear. His eyes were red, his posture rigid, as if the world he had built was collapsing inside him. Arav did not know who these people were or what tragedy was unfolding behind those doors, but he recognized something universal: grief. It was the same expression he had seen on the night he held his grandmother's hand as she struggled to breathe, the same fear, the same helplessness, the same silent request for a miracle. As he handed over the parcel, Arav felt an odd pull toward the hallway where the tension seemed thickest. Not curiosity, something deeper, a quiet intuition cultivated by years of navigating uncertainty. His shift was ending, and he should have been on his way home, but his footsteps slowed instead of quickening. Something was urging him to stay a moment longer. Near the elevator, the billionaire's assistant argued with a doctor over treatment options. Their voices were muffled, but heavy with desperation. Arav didn't intend to eavesdrop, but a few words reached him: organ failure. No response. Nothing more we can try. Even the walls seemed to echo defeat. He took a step back, preparing to leave, but then he saw something that made him pause: a young nurse, tears welling in her eyes, walking out of the ICU wing. She clutched a small clipboard against her chest as if bracing herself. In that moment, she didn't look like a medical professional. She looked like a child trying to hold herself together. Arav's instincts pushed him forward. Without thinking, he asked softly, "Are you okay?" The nurse didn't answer, but she gave a tight nod, brushing her tears quickly, as if she wasn't allowed to show emotion in a place meant for strength. Even though she avoided details, the weight on her shoulders was clear. Someone inside was slipping away, and no one could stop it. Arav didn't know whose life hung in the balance. But something inside him felt unsettled, a faint stirring, a whisper that this moment was different. He moved toward the waiting area, intending to sit for a minute before leaving. But as he passed the VIP lounge, he noticed a large digital screen showing live vitals from a nearby ICU room. The numbers flashed in erratic decline. A heart struggling, a body failing. And just then, a door opened at the far end of the hallway. A hospital bed slowly rolled out, guided by 2 nurses and a senior doctor. The billionaire followed behind, looking years older than he had earlier. His mother lay motionless on the bed, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. She looked fragile, not like a woman with wealth, history, or status, but simply like a human being at the boundary between life and loss. Arav stood at a distance, heart tightening without understanding why. He felt something stir, a sense that he had seen this condition before. Not here, not in a hospital, but somewhere far more humble, where medical tools were replaced by old natural remedies his grandmother used to trust. Remedies that came from generations who lived without access to modern medicine. Remedies that still worked in places the world had forgotten. The doctors surrounding the bed spoke quietly, their expressions resigned. The billionaire's hands shook as he adjusted the blanket over his mother. No one noticed Arav, no one ever did. But as he watched the scene unfold, a memory snapped into place, sharp, vivid, and impossible to ignore. His grandmother. That night when her breathing collapsed, that strange, rare reaction caused by a household herb she had accidentally consumed. A reaction so unusual that even their local clinic had failed to diagnose it. Yet Arav had recognized it because he had once seen the same symptoms in an old healer's notes, a thin, fragile booklet of traditional cures he used to carry. He remembered the exact solution. He remembered the exact method. He remembered how it brought his grandmother back from the brink. Within minutes, his pulse quickened, because the woman on that hospital bed showed the exact same signs, and in that moment, standing alone, unnoticed, Arav realized something terrifying. He might know what everyone else had missed. Arav's breath caught in his chest, the realization hitting him with a force he wasn't prepared for. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't educated in medical science. He was a delivery boy who spent his days navigating crowded streets. But what he had seen, what he remembered, it wasn't imagination. It was certainty, the same certainty that once saved the only family he had left. He didn't move at first. He stood frozen, watching the ICU door slowly close as the medical team prepared to administer yet another intervention that would likely fail. The billionaire's shoulders slumped forward, his head lowered, as if gravity itself had doubled its pull on him. No one in that hallway looked like they believed a miracle was coming. Arav felt a quiet war begin inside him. Logic warned him to walk away, to leave the business of medicine to those who wore the coats and carried the authority. Society had taught him that people like him didn't step into the matters of the wealthy, and certainly not into life and death decisions. But then another memory rose, calmer, clearer, undeniable. His grandmother gasping for breath, her pulse slowing, her eyes glazing. A frantic journey to the clinic. A doctor shaking his head. Arav flipping through that old healer's booklet while everyone around him panicked. A forgotten remedy, one that worked in minutes. He had recognized the same symptoms today. The same pallor. The same dangerous reaction triggered by a substance nearly invisible in routine tests. It wasn't a sickness. It was a rare toxin response, one only traditional healers used to treat. He swallowed hard. If he stayed silent, this woman would die. As the thought settled, Arav felt something shift, a quiet anchor forming inside him. It wasn't courage. It was responsibility. Sometimes life didn't choose the person who was most qualified. It chose the person who cared enough to step forward. He approached the glass window of the ICU, peering inside without crossing any boundaries. The machines beeped steadily but weakly. Nurses adjusted tubes and checked vitals. The billionaire stood at her bedside, holding her wrists in his trembling hands, whispering a prayer only he could hear. His face was crushed under the weight of helplessness. And behind all the technology, behind all the expertise, the woman continued to fade. Arav knew he had to speak. But how? Who would listen to a delivery boy? Who would trust him? Who would even let him near the room? He stepped back into the corridor, gathering whatever resolve he could. His palms were sweating, his heart pounding, yet his steps carried purpose as he moved toward the nurse he had seen earlier, the one who had cried quietly near the clipboard. She stood alone now, reviewing charts with trembling hands. Arav stopped a few feet away, unsure of how to begin. His voice felt small, but he forced the words out. Not a demand, not an instruction, just a quiet confession. He gently told her that he recognized the symptoms not as a doctor, but from experience. He described what he had seen with his grandmother, the rare toxin reaction, the unusual triggers. He mentioned the herbal compound that often caused it, something commonly found in certain homemade teas, supplements, or even organic tonics older people consumed. The nurse blinked, startled. She looked at him with a mix of confusion and disbelief. But there was also something else in her eyes: exhaustion, desperation, and the faintest shred of willingness to listen. She didn't dismiss him immediately. Instead, she asked a few questions, not formal, just hesitant, curious. Arav answered them with precision, recalling everything he had learned from the healer's notes. His voice did not shake now. It carried truth. Still, the nurse hesitated. She couldn't act on the words of a stranger. She couldn't risk her career on an unverified claim. Arav understood that. Yet he persisted, calmly, respectfully, explaining that the condition was extremely rare and often misdiagnosed. He pointed out subtle signs visible even from the hallway: a pattern in her breathing, the discoloration near her lips, the unusual reaction to injections. The nurse's expression shifted slowly, the seed of possibility quietly planting itself. Before she could respond further, a door slammed open down the hallway. One of the senior doctors stormed out, frustration etched across his face. Another followed behind him, shaking his head with a defeated sigh. The billionaire remained inside the room, unaware of the unfolding conversation beyond the glass. The nurse took a step toward the doctors, intent on mentioning a potential observation. Arav watched nervously, hoping his words wouldn't be dismissed the moment they reached ears burdened with authority. The nurse approached the older doctor cautiously. Arav stayed back, unable to hear the exchange. But judging by the doctor's quick glance in his direction, she had mentioned him. His heartbeat stumbled. If the doctor ridiculed her, she might suffer for it. He felt a pang of guilt. He should never have involved her. But then the doctor paused. He didn't dismiss her outright. He seemed annoyed, skeptical, but not entirely closed. He spoke for a few seconds, gesturing toward the ICU. The nurse insisted again, pointing to the vitals chart in her hand. Another doctor joined them, listening briefly. Still, there was no clear decision. Arav felt utterly powerless now, standing like a shadow in the corridor, while the fate of the woman rested in hands that did not trust him. He almost turned to leave, not because he doubted himself, but because he feared causing more trouble. He had done all he could. But as he stepped back, something unexpected happened. The younger doctor, the one who had been quiet, approached Arav directly. His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. He asked Arav firmly what exactly he believed was happening. Not why he thought it, what he thought. Arav explained again, repeating every detail with calm clarity. The doctor listened, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. When Arav finished, there was a long pause. Then, without a word, the doctor turned and walked back toward the ICU. Arav didn't know whether his input would be used or dismissed. He felt suspended in a strange space between hope and fear. Minutes passed. The hallway buzzed with quiet movement. Nurses hurried in and out. The billionaire remained at the bedside, unaware that the thin thread holding his mother's life might have shifted because of someone he had never seen. And then, the younger doctor returned. He didn't call out to Arav. He didn't gesture. He simply gave the nurse a silent nod. Something had changed. They were checking. They were testing for the rare condition. They were giving space to the possibility that the invisible delivery boy might have seen the truth buried beneath all the complexity. As the nurse hurried back into the ICU, Arav exhaled shakily, feeling his knees weaken. He wasn't relieved. Not yet. This was only the beginning. If he was wrong, they would lose precious minutes. If he was right, those few minutes could mean everything. The corridor returned to stillness, but inside the room, procedures shifted. Subtle changes, adjustments, reactions observed with new eyes. Arav watched through the glass, and then he saw it happen, the slightest, smallest improvement. Barely noticeable, but real. A change that made the machines beep differently. A change that made the nurse glance up with sudden hope. A change that made the youngest doctor hurry forward with urgency. Arav's heart pounded, because for the first time, after hours of decline, the woman's body had begun to respond, and the entire hospital was about to face the truth. The miracle they had been waiting for had started because someone they never saw finally stepped forward. The atmosphere inside the ICU shifted almost instantly. What had been a quiet, defeated space suddenly pulsed with urgency. Nurses rushed to adjust equipment. The younger doctor directed rapid instructions. And every pair of eyes locked onto the subtle but undeniable signs of improvement. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, no miraculous leap, but the faint rise in the woman's vitals was enough to shatter the wall of hopelessness that had been closing in for hours. Arav stood frozen behind the glass, barely daring to breathe. He wasn't inside the room, yet it felt as though his heartbeat synchronized with the beeping monitors. Each tiny upward movement felt like a whisper of confirmation, as if destiny itself was acknowledging that he hadn't imagined anything. What he had recognized was real. The remedy he remembered mattered, and now the doctors knew it too. The older specialists crowded around the bed, confusion etched on their faces. They had tried everything modern medicine could offer. Yet improvement only came after their approach shifted toward testing for the rare toxin reaction Arav had described. The irony did not go unnoticed, but there was no time to discuss pride or prestige. A life was shifting back toward safety, piece by fragile piece. The billionaire, who had been losing grip on hope, suddenly straightened. His eyes widened when he noticed the faint color returning to his mother's lips. For hours, he had been sinking into despair, but now emotion crashed into him like a wave, relief fighting disbelief. He reached for her hand again, and this time, her fingers twitched. He gasped. A tiny movement, a small miracle. But to a son who thought he had lost her, it was everything inside the room. The younger doctor quickly prepared a counteracting treatment based on the rare reaction Rav described. It wasn't experimental, just ancient, forgotten, overshadowed by newer techniques. Yet sometimes the old world still held answers the new one overlooked. The doctor worked swiftly, focused, determined to stabilize her before the window of opportunity closed again, as he administered the remedy. The woman's body responded with a shiver, her breathing deepening ever so slightly. A nurse adjusted her oxygen levels. The monitors beeped in rising consistency. The billionaire pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, tears slipping down despite his attempts to remain composed. Minutes stretched like hours. Then her heartbeat steadied. Her breathing eased. Her eyelids fluttered. Not fully. Not awake. But alive, the room erupted in a mix of relief and astonishment. The senior doctors exchanged bewildered glances, each silently questioning how they had overlooked such a possibility. The younger doctor stepped away from the bedside, his chest rising with a deep exhale. Knowing they had made the right call at the last moment, outside, Arav felt his legs give slightly as overwhelming relief washed through him. He leaned against the wall, eyes burning with emotion. He hadn't saved her, the doctors had. But the knowledge that guided them came from a place no one had expected. From him, from memories rooted in simplicity and struggle, from a life society often dismissed. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't want applause. He only wanted her to survive, for a son not to lose his mother, the way he had once feared losing his grandmother. As the ICU door opened, The younger doctor stepped out first. He looked directly at Arav. His expression softened, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but the nod he gave carried more weight than any words could. It was respect, genuine and rare, offered to someone the world usually overlooked. But before Arav could respond, another figure approached. The billionaire emerged slowly, his steps unsteady, eyes still red. He scanned the corridor, confusion crossing his face as he noticed the attention shifting toward a young man in a delivery uniform. The nurse whispered something to him, something brief but sufficient. The billionaire's gaze locked onto Arav. A heavy silence settled. He walked toward him with a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope etched across his expression. Every step he took seemed weighed down with gratitude he didn't yet know how to express. When he stood in front of Arav, his voice didn't rise. It didn't demand. It didn't question. Instead, simply placed a hand over his chest, a gesture of profound thanks. He didn't know the details. He didn't know the full story. But he knew enough that someone who had no reason to involve himself chose to speak when it mattered most. The billionaire's lips parted as if to say something, but emotion stole his words. For a moment, he was no longer a man of wealth or power, just a son who nearly lost the person he loved most. Inside the ICU, the woman's vitals continued to stabilize. Her breathing found rhythm. Her pulse carried strength. The remedy was working faster than anyone expected. Doctors checked her readings repeatedly, disbelief slowly turning into cautious certainty. She was going to live. Arav lowered his gaze, his throat tight with an emotion he couldn't name. This moment wasn't about him. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about witnessing a life being pulled back from the edge and knowing, quietly, that he had been the thread that kept it from falling. The billionaire pulled in a shaky breath, still struggling to form words. A man used to commanding rooms now stood humbled before a boy who owned nothing but courage. The tension in the hallway softened, replaced by something gentler, warmer. And for the first time since he had entered the hospital, Arav no longer felt invisible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with meaning, filled with unspoken acknowledgement from everyone in the hallway. Nurses paused as they passed by, their eyes softening when they glanced at him. The younger doctor stood with quiet pride, knowing he had trusted a stranger's insight at a moment when many would have dismissed it. Even the senior doctors, still processing the unexpected turn, carried expressions tinged with humility. Inside the ICU, the steady rhythm of the monitors became a quiet anthem of hope. The billionaire's mother, moments earlier drifting toward the edge of life, now showed signs of returning strength. Her breathing had stabilized. Her pulse carried new steadiness. And the subtle color rising in her skin told a story of recovery, beginning from the tiniest spark of intuition. Arav remained near the wall, trying to make sense of the moment. He had not sought recognition or reward. He had not planned to become part of a stranger's tragedy. He only followed a feeling, one born from experience, compassion, and a desperate desire to prevent a son from losing his mother. And now, as the weight of everything settled on him, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense of worth that didn't come from status or wealth, but from the simple act of caring. Gradually, the billionaire took a steadying breath and approached him again. His eyes, still red from hours of grief, now reflected a quiet mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He didn't speak, not immediately. Instead, he extended his hand slowly, not as a businessman accustomed to being respected, but as a son offering thanks beyond measure. Arav hesitated before accepting the handshake. The billionaire's grip trembled with sincerity. It was a moment that bridged two worlds, one shaped by privilege, the other by perseverance. For the first time, they met as equals, bound not by status but by humanity. A nurse stepped out of the ICU to update the staff. "She's responding well," she announced softly. The words rippled through the corridor, easing tension from every shoulder. The billionaire closed his eyes for a moment, a breath of relief escaping him as if the weight of the world had finally lifted. Arav watched quietly, ready to slip away now that everything seemed stable. He didn't want attention. He didn't want questions or praise. His job was done. He took a step back toward the exit. But the younger doctor intercepted him gently. "You should stay for a moment," said, not as an order, but as a warm request. "She'll be stable enough soon. And when she wakes up, she deserves to know who helped save her." Ara felt embarrassment rise in his chest. He shook his head politely. I didn't save her." "You did?" The doctor smiled, not a proud smile, but one filled with calm truth. "Medicine saved her," he replied. "But medicine only works when we see what needs to be seen. And today, you saw what none of us did." Aro didn't know how to respond. He lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of humility and unexpected honor. Minutes passed slowly. The corridor softened into gentle quiet. And then, finally, a soft knock echoed from inside the ICU, two gentle taps that signaled improvement. The billionaire rushed inside, and Arav remained at the doorway, watching from a respectful distance. The woman lay with her eyes half open, weak but undeniably conscious. The billionaire knelt beside her, tears returning not of fear this time, but of overwhelming relief. She managed to lift her hand toward him, a faint gesture that carried all the strength she had left. He clasped it tightly, whispering something only she could hear. Her gaze drifted around the room, taking in the medical staff, the lights, the monitors. Then, slowly, it shifted toward the doorway toward Arav. Their eyes met in that brief, fragile moment. Something pure passed between them. Gratitude from someone who had hovered on the edge of life, and humility from someone who had simply chosen not to walk away. She didn't know his name. He didn't need her thanks. Yet the connection felt profound, soft, human. The billionaire turned toward R again, this time with steadier breath. He walked to the door, placed a firm hand on ROF's shoulder, and simply said, "Thank you." Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Arav offered a small nod, unsure what else to give. He wanted no reward, no recognition. He only wanted her to survive. Slowly, he stepped back. As he moved toward the exit, the staff parted for him, not because he asked, not because he demanded, but because they wanted to. People who once saw him as another uniformed worker now looked at him with quiet respect. In a place built on hierarchy, he had broken through with nothing but instinct and compassion. Outside the hospital, the city carried on with its noise and movement. Cars sped by, lights flickered in distant buildings, and life continued as if unaware of the miracle that had unfolded inside. Arav stood at the entrance for a moment, inhaling the cold evening air. His shift had ended long ago, but something inside him felt lighter, fuller. He walked away not as a hero, not as someone seeking recognition, but simply as a young man who had chosen to listen to the quiet voice inside him when it mattered most. A voice that reminded him that worth does not come from wealth, education, or status, but from courage, compassion, and the strength to speak when silence is easier. And somewhere behind him, in a quiet ICU room, a mother awakened to a world she nearly left. Unaware that her second chance at life came from someone the world rarely noticed, a delivery boy, a stranger, a reminder that humanity's greatest miracles often come from the places we least expect. Because sometimes, the person society overlooks is the one who ends up holding the light.